Hey, this is Joe from Home Studio Corner. This has become a bit of a series here on setting levels, something some people might call gain staging. I don't like that term for other reasons, but in the last two videos, we talked about setting levels, how important it is not to clip, and dealing with noise when you're setting levels, and how if you set it too low, you'll introduce more noise into the recording, but how also that's not really a big deal. I got this question to the first video from Mike Fucili, and he says, love the video on basics, how to set levels. Could you expand on this to talk about setting levels with external mic preamps? Something in the analog realm, like the Warm Audio 273, I understand setting the output of that preamp into the interface using the same principles you've outlined, but I also know that some folks talk about setting the gain on those sort of mic preamps a bit hotter, as they like the sound of the analog warmth. What do you listen for / hear to set the gain on those sort of preamps? So if you're not familiar, this is an external preamp. They come in all shapes and sizes. Your audio interface that you have, so I've got this AudioBox Go, new thing from Personas. Very tiny. This is about as small of an audio interface as you can get. But if it has a microphone input, that has a preamp on it. Okay, we talked about that in the other video. But there are also, these interfaces will have line inputs that we can run from an external kind of dedicated hardware analog preamp. That's what this is. So this is an example. This is from Warm Audio. I've not used their stuff, but I've heard great things. And so this is a 2-channel mic preamp. We can tell because we have these two sets of identical controls. And if we start looking, we can learn a lot by just looking at the gear. We can see we have phantom power button. We can switch it to a line. Don't care about that. Over here, we've got our gain. Here we've got a high pass. And here we've got an output knob. That's what's really important with things like this. If the preamp has a gain to it, but then also has an output knob, that means you've got 2 points of volume control. And the reason they do that is there is, like I talked about, and I probably oversimplified it, but back in the days of analog consoles and analog tape, the tape was noisy, so you wanted to hit the tape hard to keep the signal high above the noise. But there was also a what am I trying to say? A pleasant effect to running the preamps a little bit hotter, and also to hitting the tape a little bit harder. There would be this kind of warmth to it, the analog sound that you hear about. Now, first thing I want to say is you can absolutely make wonderful recordings using the plain old vanilla preamps that come with your audio interface. They're clean. It's what you're listening to right now. I would argue my voice sounds fantastic. Such a weird thing to say. You can absolutely get that done. However, just like I can record a great song with one guitar, I like to have multiple guitars. And they give me different flavors for different scenarios. So it makes sense that some folks would have different preamps for different scenarios if that's something that your budget allows and something you want to dive into. So I have an external preamp here. In just a second, I'm going to run a bass guitar into it. And really crank the preamp and see what we get sound-wise. So the idea is I've got all these different points where I can adjust the volume, right? On the bass, I can turn the knob on the bass. That adjusts the volume. I can adjust the input on the preamp, which would be this knob right here. I can adjust the output of the preamp. That's another volume. Why have 2? That's so that I can turn this one up and really drive those electronics, whether it's a tube preamp, which is the one I'm going to use. The Warm Audio is not a tube preamp, I don't believe. It's like a transformer based off like a 1073 transformer-based preamp. But same idea. When you push those a little bit hotter, it imparts this kind of warmth to it. That's the idea anyway. And so we can drive this up and even get some kind of warm analog clipping from that circuit, but then we turn it down on the output knob to make sure we don't clip inside of our DAW, inside of Studio One. So when I had Studio One open the other day, talking about setting levels, we were showing the meter here. We can show it right there. And we were saying, we don't want to get it as close to here as possible. We don't want it to be super low as possible. So the idea is clipping here, the final stage coming into your computer, always sounds bad. It doesn't have a pleasant sound to it. I mean, sure, you could find a use for it, but generally speaking, terrible, can't be undone really. But pushing an analog piece of gear is kind of cool. But it only works as long as you don't clip going into the computer, going into the final stage, the line input. The converter is what's clipping. So the converter is the thing that takes the analog signal, turns it into digital. That converter, if you clip that, it just gives you an output of clipping. That's kind of what that is. So we want to make sure we have a way of taking this jacked up volume and bringing it back down to an acceptable level so we don't actually clip in the digital world. Clipping in the analog world is cool. That's what makes guitar amps sound cool. There's clipping happening. Clipping in the digital world, not so great. So let me grab my bass. I'm going to plug it into this external preamp, and let's just take a listen and see what it sounds like. Okay, you'll have to forgive me. I'm playing this Ibanez, what is it? Micro. It's a short scale bass. Pretty cheap, but I mean, it's better than playing it on the keyboard, I guess. So, I've got this bass plugged into this preamp. Let me get out another camera and I'll show you what the settings are and we'll record a few samples. Okay, here's the bass. I've got my guitar, sorry, it's so dusty. My guitar plugged into the instrument input. I've got it set to instrument in. I've got the gain up a little bit. Compressor and EQ are bypassed. And then you can see there's an output level there. So I've got 2 places to adjust level. The gain here, the trim there, so 3 places. And then the output level there. If we look at the meter here and I play an A, we can see it's already pretty loud here. And if we look in Studio One, we've got a good level already. All right, let me record a quick bass part with that tone. Inspired as usual. Okay, now without dropping the bass, I'm going to crank up this input and I'm going to turn down this output and I'm going to play an A. So I'm getting nothing, probably because I turned this down too far. Alright, that's too loud. Turned it down a little bit. Still too loud. Let's turn down, I'm going to turn on the input a little bit. Adjust the output a little bit. See how that works? Okay, now let's crank this another 1 click. Adjust this one down a little bit. See what that's doing. Okay, so the meter's going pretty wild here. It's pretty hot there. But we can see in Studio One, it's not technically clipping the input. So let's record that. Okay, that one, you can hear it's an analog clipping, so maybe it's not quite as bad as a digital clipping, but still, it's a little rounder sounding, but it's still a buzzy sound. I want to find one in the middle where I can crank it a little bit, but not to the point of buzzing, and see if I can get a better tone than the first one. Okay, so aside from the volumes being different, why don't we normalize each and give them each a quick listen. Well, those aren't balanced at all. Let's just eyeball it and see if we like one over the other. So this one obviously is going to be too crispy. But what about this last one? And then the first one. You can see just by looking at the waveforms, the first one is a little more dynamic, and the last one has a little more, I don't know if it's like just like a compression from hitting the tubes a little bit harder, but I drove it just as far as I could get it without it buzzing, and we end up with this that, let's just get rid of that middle one, that is a little, if we adjust the volume, you can see this one's this one has a lot more spikes. It's a lot more dynamic. This one's a little more contained. So like, that didn't turn the compressor on. That's just kind of the natural way the tubes kind of squish down on the sound a little bit. So I'm going to hit play, just let them both play one last time, see if we hear a difference. So they're not night and day different. I mean, honestly, it might just be differences in performance. One was a little more contained than the other, but you can hear that we can get in different tones just by messing with the input and output volumes. And also hear how the analog clipping sounds a little bit different than the digital clipping. And if you have an external preamp, don't go cranking up the output volume thinking that you're driving the tubes when all you're actually doing is hitting your input on your interface too hard and causing digital clipping, which is gross and defeats the whole purpose of having an external preamp to begin with. If you like this video, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe. If you haven't checked out my free 5-step mix guide or my recording cheat sheet, you can check those out at homestudiocorner.com/free. And if you have questions and stuff you want me to cover in a future video, leave a comment below. I'll get great ideas from those. Maybe I'll feature yours in an upcoming video. All right, thanks for watching. See ya.